Hello, my name is Mark Everson. I'm one of the National Behaviour Advisors, and I'm leading this video on leadership and management, which was one of the core modules, core virtual modules in terms of training around behaviour improvement. It goes without saying that leadership and management of any initiative within a school is critical to school improvement, and it's no different for behaviour. In fact, behaviour is probably one of the most pervasive because it is something which pertains to all aspects of school life and impinges on the experience of children, parents, families, and also support staff as well as teaching staff. So let's get on with the slides. The slide deck that we're using today is used in training for the Behaviour Hubs program and is has spaces in it for reflection, and so it could be used by you just for your own use, but also could be used as part of a training program. And I will stop and pause where there are times for consideration and reflection of certain issues within the slide deck. School leaders, and it comes to us all as school leaders at some point, but they do possess the widest and most influential levers to influence school culture. And there comes a time, I think, if you may well have experienced this, I certainly did, when I was sitting in my office one day, newly appointed head teacher, and I was concerned about something in the school, and I thought, well, really wish something could happen about this. And actually, I thought, well, if something is going to improve, it's only going to improve because I make it improve. And that was a bit of an epiphany for me as a school leader, because it meant that I was then taking responsibility and ownership for everything that happened in the school, and felt at that point that if I wanted something to happen, it was up to me to do something about it. And that's true of behaviour. There are challenges that we all face at the moment, and I'm well aware of them. I'm a CEO of 10 schools. 6 of my schools are secondary with pupil premium figures over 60%, and we face challenges every single day in terms of the areas in which they work. But it's also true that the processes we've got in place and the systems and policies we use are really effective in mitigating any concerns or any difficulties we have that are present in the local community, but not just the local community, in terms of the experiences of the young people that they sometimes try to or inevitably bring to school. So the intended learning outcomes, what we're going to cover here. We were going to talk a little bit about belief in school effectiveness, particularly in pressurized environments, school leadership in pressurized environments, and belief being really critical to effectiveness. Also, the centrality of behaviour management in the whole school improvement, and how to create authentic and deliverable improvement over the long term. So something which is going to last long beyond a particular leadership tenure, which potentially is about changing the whole ethos and culture within a school, which actually then becomes a self-fulfilling culture in the future. Building on that respect for relationships and empowering staff to take responsibility, and then how to deal with the inevitable difficulties that we face when we're introducing new things, the challenges that come with that, because not everything works the way we want it to. I wish it did, but it doesn't, and we know that. So common features of successful school leadership are commitment and high levels of focus, ambition, mission, altruism. We've seen it all in lots of books, lots of pre-reading that you might have done around leadership, lots of work that we do on the NPQH or similar courses in MAs and MEds. It's all around those sorts of values. But the most important attribute that we believe is belief, because when the chips are down, when you don't have a manual to go to, what you have to do is fall on your instincts, fall back on your instincts. And if your belief is such that behavior is critical to the school, belief is that the school leadership are responsible for making things happen, then fundamentally, your decision making, your instincts will be right. If you don't believe that's the case, you don't believe that the children can behave better, that there's nothing intrinsically difficult around managing children's behaviour, then your decision making might be slightly different. And that's a really important attribute, because all of the big decisions and all of the little decisions that the leaders take add up to our effectiveness or otherwise. The belief must be that school culture and behaviour is a foundation of sustainable school improvement. In all the schools I've taken over, in all the schools I've worked in all schools I've assessed, when they are really struggling, largely it's because of behaviour becoming out of hand, out of control. And the school having a very clear approach to behaviour is always critical as a first rung, or one of the couple of the first rungs, to actually gaining improvement across the whole range of indicators that we'd like to see. The second thing is really critical to understand, is that culture change can be designed. You don't have to just alight on it by accident. It can be built, it can be designed, it can be taught, it can be delivered. And the new culture can be sustained. And the most important thing, that developing a positive, sustainable culture is the responsibility of the school leader, either in terms of developing a leadership team that is able to deliver it, or deliver it themselves in smaller provision. It's really critical that that is seen as a core tenet of what we do. Of course, we have to work through other people. Of course, we have to make sure that there is consistency in everything we do as school leaders. Of course, we have to ensure that all children understand what's required, and we can't do that alone. But it is the school leaders and the school leadership team that build that capacity to do that in the long term. It is us who appoint. It is us who make decisions on what the priorities are. It is us who make those decisions about what to pick up when we're walking around corridors, what to address, what not to address. So stakeholder engagement is also a critical thing, because in order for us to be able to fulfill that responsibility and take that role on, we need to ensure that all of the difficulties and all of the challenges against what we're trying to do are essentially persuaded. The people who are not necessarily convinced to start with are persuaded over time, and that governors understand the importance of good behaviour. That we are trying to promote respectful relationships and create safe spaces for learning to happen for staff, pupils and families. And we are making sure that we follow equalities duties, and we are considering the well-being of young and mental health of young people, particularly post-pandemic, but also because safe, calm learning environments are actually the goal of this program. And actually that is the thing that develops the long-term sustainability of an environment which is supportive of well-being for both staff and children. And we also have to undertake to monitor these factors and indicators periodically, to test how effective we're being, and to address head on where we see things are not aligned, where people are not convinced, and to make sure that we provide opportunities for discussion and persuasion, and in some cases direction, because we have to be clear that that in many cases is also required. So we're going to just pause here after that initial discussion around belief, and reflect on identifying stakeholder challenges, because one of the things you have to do as school leadership is you have to take strategic decisions about how you're going to implement, where you're going to go to first, what pre-work you need to do, to pre-consultation work you need to do to convince people that this is the right way forward. And in order to do that, it's very good to have some assessment of where the likely challenge is going to come from. And this little table, which you can write down and use in a moment, is to try to, it tries to draw out from you where you see the major challenges coming from. So it's asking you to rank each stakeholder against the belief, the core principles that we're talking about are actually something that they believe in. And secondly, that they can discuss amongst yourselves, if you're more than one person, or consider yourself, for yourself, if you're just one person looking at this, how you're going to circumnavigate it, how you're going to approach that, how you're going to strategize your approach for pulling together a plan for implementation, which is going to address the concerns that these people might have. So that's for you to think about, and give yourself at least 10 minutes, maybe more, to work through that, maybe sketch out a little plan of action, and then we'll return to the presentation. So hopefully you've had a chance to pause, think about it, and come up with some solutions. It may well be that you need to go and talk to people individually. It may well be that you need to find out from other schools which are particularly effective in this area, how they do it. You may need key stakeholders to visit other schools that are doing it well. You might need to draw in examples from other schools. You might need to provide opportunities for training and reflection for some people, to actually ensure that they're aware of the ways of going about things, or maybe point them to research. And Tom Bennett's book, his research in 2017, which was all about creating a culture, is what the program is built on, and is built on the research that he undertook across some of the best schools in the country for managing and leading on behaviour. So it is the systems, cultures and norms of a school that need to be addressed first in behaviour improvement. Stakeholders need to be convinced of this, otherwise the strategic effectiveness of any approach will be undermined. And remember, Peter Drucker says that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So you can strategize about this, but if you are not aware of where the pitfalls are, what you're dealing with as a current culture, then you will be eaten up, or your strategy will be eaten up, and you won't get very far. So that's really important, to assess where you are with the different stakeholders, to plan an approach which brings them on board, and then to direct where necessary and to push where necessary to take things forward. We do this because there is actually a hierarchy of excellence. We've talked about belief-led leadership, and that's at the bottom of this pyramid. But very close second to that is exemplary behaviour. And we build the other attributes of great schools on top of that: the curriculum, the outstanding teaching, the assessment and support. Now, in reality, we're often doing these things together. But fundamentally, if we have the leadership right, and if we build, wider capacity leadership within our schools, we will be able to deliver that exemplary behaviour. And that exemplary behaviour will be the thing that makes the difference in school improvement more generally. As Tom said in his research, Creating a Culture, when behaviour in general improves throughout a school, the impact is pupils achieve more academically and socially, time is reclaimed for better and more learning, and staff satisfaction improves, retention is higher, and recruitment is less problematic. You have a much better school as a result. To ignore it and to leave it to others is really, in my view, not a sustainable approach, and will not lead to the outcomes that you're searching for to create great schools for our young people, which I'm sure that everybody is aligned to. So let's go then to the vision for your school. What is the vision for your school? Does it currently have a clear and detailed sense of purpose and strategy? And is that easy to articulate to pupils? Does it easily transfer and explicitly transfer to culture, conduct and behavior? And could it be extrapolated to encompass that? Because one of the things you really want to do is try and nail, or certainly nail to your current vision statement, what the school is trying to achieve, because there is no doubt that behavior will be a key component of that. So, for example, if we move forward and look at two schools' vision statements, you could see how example one, at this school, our purpose is excellence. Broadly speaking, excellence would mean excellence in behaviour and could be easily extrapolated to that. And the second one is a bit more prosaic, the vision statement, but a sense of justice, innovative teaching in practice, high quality, and educational excellence already within that, which really means that both these vision statements actually implicitly contain expectations which would transfer or translate into a behavioral context. So when you're starting your persuasion of your stakeholders, it is a good idea to go back to your vision statement. At the very most, it's probably going to require tweaking or some careful thought about how you bring your vision statement or bring behavior within your vision statement. But it shouldn't be out of kilter with what you're trying to achieve at a school. All schools, and I haven't yet seen a vision statement doesn't lend itself to some discussion around behavior. So this is another point for reflection that you can have a little bit of time to think about. So if you're trying to create a behavioral vision that you want to permeate through your school, does the vision really need to be changed or just interpreted in a different way? Can it be modeled and easily articulated? Is it authentic and persuasive? Is it continually referred to in all stakeholder communication? Does it easily align with the policy and practice you want to see? So have a think about your current vision statement. Have a think about how it could be used as part of that process of engaging stakeholders. And again, sketch yourself 3 or 4 bullet points that you can go ahead, you can take with you to actually help you in the next stage in this process. So probably at least 10 minutes again to think about that before we return to the presentation. Okay, so let's just assume now that we all understand where the belief deficits are. We understand what the strategy is to address that. We've got the vision statement in hand. We know what we're going to use and how we're going to pin our behavioral improvement program to the vision statement. We are now in the point, or you would now be a point as the leader and manager of this process, that you've got to think about planning and mobilization. So the detailed planning is important, but there are certain things to remember as a leader when we are working in schools. Schools are incredibly difficult and complex places to run. We have different stakeholders, different accountabilities. We have the day-to-day potential morass of complaints and difficulties and issues that come from a variety of sources of leaders, from the local community, parents, children, teachers, local authority, trust board, MAT executive, you name it. It could come to your door. And as a classroom teacher as well, you're trying to manage lots of different things on a day-to-day basis. As a behavior mentor or a learning mentor or a TA, you're doing the same thing. So it's really important that we build capacity. And how do we do that? We've got to make things simple. We want to keep everything as clear as possible, as simple as possible, and not overcomplicate things, because simplicity creates capacity. If we want people to do things in the long term in a sustainable way, it has to be simple, because that capacity generated from the simplicity is the thing that supports sustainability. If it's easy to do, we will do it. Once it becomes difficult, then you get more resistance, partly from people not wanting to do it, but also because it becomes difficult to remember to keep in your head on a day-to-day basis. And the key thing to remember here is that actually delivering sustainability and the improvement is the leader's responsibility. And one of the things I'm always struck with is the curation responsibility you have as a school leader. There are many things we could be doing, but actually what is the most important and how do we make it manageable? That's one of the key aspects of leadership. So Keeping those principles in mind, that simplicity principle, because it leads to capacity improvement, because it leads to sustainability. What do we do next? Well, we have to do a little bit of work around defining what we want to deliberately construct over time, so that the stages are clearly planned for, understood, that we build them carefully, we leave little to chance, particularly in areas of concern. I mean, I would say that I've spent more time trying to plan different approaches to lunch times in my school career than I have potentially any other system in the school, because it is so critical to the well-being of children, so critical to the well-being of staff, and so critical for how the afternoons start. So systems, routines, and rituals should be designed to focus on improving the social and academic conduct of pupils. And actually, every aspect of school life should be considered, and that includes before and after school as well. And so when you're looking at policies, and you're looking at processes, and you're looking at systems, you've got to throw the net wide, and you've got to think about where your problems are coming from, and then try to iron out, try to systemize out difficulty. I was in a primary playground about 6 months ago, and there was a lot of noise in that primary playground, and it had gone from the point of, joyous engagement in games to a little bit more than that, and things were getting potentially dangerous over on the climbing frame. And the teacher who was responsible for the children blew a whistle and put her hand up. And when she did that, all the children stopped. They all put their hands up and they all fell silent. She was then able to say to the children, just give them very sound advice about how to play, what the values of the school were, and then was able to blow the whistle again, and they continued at a more respectful and more sensible way. Now, it's a great example of how a ritual which was understood by the children was used to solve a potential problem. But that came about because they, over a period of time, had realized that they were getting a lot of accidents in playgrounds, a lot of negative interaction, and they needed to find some way of calming things down when things were getting out of hand in what was a very crowded inner city playground. Not necessarily saying that's the only way to do it, but it's certainly very effective in that situation. So every aspect of school life needs to be considered, and often classroom teachers are only really considering their own environment. As school leaders, leadership and management is about the whole school, about the whole child, about every interaction. So pause and reflect again. How aligned are your policies and practices on delivering good behaviour? How simple and pervasive are your policies and practices, and the language that you use to get them across? Do you use a very simple language? Do you use a hand signal? Lots of primary schools have chants and things to establish calm, or hand signals, or certainly non-verbal communication is used in secondary and primary schools in some cases. What are your priorities? Where are the difficulties and what needs to change? So that's for you to think about again for 10 minutes or so, just to consider what would be your priorities if you had a blank sheet of paper and you could just get on and do things. So the types of things you may want to consider when you're designing your strategic approach are timings of the day and the place of positive assemblies, all really important. Are you taking control of that? Are the times of the day making it difficult? Is lunchtime too long or too short? Are there staggered lunch times? Is that good? Should they be staggered if they're not? So there's all these sorts of timings and things that the leadership teams have great control over, which help manage the school environment. How do you manage transitions between activities or lessons? Moving from, again, in a primary school, I saw some fantastic non-verbal communication. A teacher held up their hand and had children sitting on carpet and put 3, and 3 meant that they had to go quiet, be quiet. 2, they didn't say anything, by the way, they were just using their hand signal. 2 meant that they had to stand up, and 1 meant that they had to silently go to their desks. And when they were at their desks, the teacher then talked to them, and then they could talk again. But the transition was flawless. And again, the children been taught how to do that. Taught what 3 meant, 2 meant, 1 meant on the hand signal, and did it automatically. Expectations to travel in school and arrival points is particularly true of rural schools, where that's sometimes bus stops can be a point of contention, actually in cities as well, but bus stops, particularly in pickups in rural schools, are particularly challenging sometimes. Timetabling, careful planning of duty rota points, where are people on duty and how do they manage their duties, what's expected of them. Arrival and decant arrangements start at the end of the day. What are the consequences for negative behavior? Is it loss of play? Is it detention? Is it loss of golden time? Does the school actively reset? If things go wrong and children are not behaving in the way that's expected, do we as school leaders say, okay, that's enough, and tomorrow we're going to have a later start and we're going to have an assembly and re-induct people in and retrain children and staff into the expectations when that's deemed necessary? Are we bold enough to do that? Do we take those bold decisions to make that happen? And that's something maybe it's worth reflecting on. Key features, again, staff briefing and other communication arrangements are really critical. How often are we promoting the positives? Assemblies are fantastic to plan and revisit key messages. Are we taking opportunity to publicly reward deserving pupils? And that can just be praise in the playground for being kind. It doesn't have to be extrinsic reward. It can be intrinsic. Are meeting schedules and agendas maximizing opportunities to drive further improvement? Are we taking information from staff and pupils and parents that actually help us to create a picture of what's going on, and then to plot and plan for a course for future improvement? And are we communicating effectively with parents about what the policies involved, and what are the consequence escalation and pupil procedures which are in place to make sure that we know what happens if something isn't effective, what the next step is. Staff engagement is the most critical thing, because how staff interact with carefully designed systems that you've created, looking at all those different aspects, is critical. And you must ensure as leaders it's a simple guide for staff rather than a large staff handbook. I quite like the getting started guides that Apple computers have, which are very clear, very simple, just little notebooks. And then they give you the starters, and then there may be some links to some websites or QR codes to look at things in more detail. But when staff start, they only really need 6 things. They need an understanding of the expectations and the staff code. They need the school day and year plan. They need a sort of a standard documentation which says how we manage behavior, how we teach, how we assess, and then all they need is links to other useful information. This is really, if I'm a teacher coming into school, that's the sort of thing I need to get started. And we don't need to overcomplicate it, going back to this idea of simplicity. But what we do need to make sure is the management of behavior is very, very prominent and explicitly trained in the induction. And we give explicit training on that, explicit coaching on that, and we return to that regularly, particularly for new staff. So if we've designed it, if we've got everything in place, we've really got to move to the next stage. And this is the most critical, because actually the writing of policies, the development of training, these are all things that in most schools are done really well. The problem we have in most schools is our ability to hold everybody accountable for doing the same thing to establish consistency. Continuity and consistency is vital for children in terms of their behavior improvement. We know that's important for their development as young children, and in two-parent families, if there is inconsistency, that leads to problems in terms of the children's development as they get older. In a school where there is much more opportunity for differences between different adults' interaction with children, it's even more important that we've got continuity and consistency. So the interface between system design and sustained improvement is often a neglected area of change. Typically we write the policy, we train, and then it's light touch from then on. And at the end of the year, we've had a good start and it's fallen away. And we think, oh, well, we better do better next year. I'm talking about my experience, not necessarily your experience. I'm sure you're much better at that. But that had been my experience over many, many years, until I sort of realized that actually it's about the endeavor every single day that actually is going to change the culture. So if you've got an existing culture, rather like Peter Drucker says, if you haven't strategized how you're going to thought about stakeholders and strategize effectively, what will happen is that will be eaten up by the culture. If you want to change the culture, Michael Beer at the Harvard Business School says you've got to start with thinking about what the day-to-day operation is going to be like. That has to be planned for. He said it's all about the design, alignment, fidelity, and adherence to systems. And that changes the culture in the long term. So we might have a vision about what the culture should be, but if we don't insist on a day-to-day basis that what we've agreed collectively is delivered, then that will mean that the culture doesn't shift, it stays the same, and it gradually takes back over. It gradually eats up our strategy. So any organizational improvement depends heavily on accountability structures. And the area of behavior improvement, this is one where it's actually, as I said right at the top of this video, is probably the most pervasive across schools, because it applies to every individual in the school, whether they are teachers, non-teachers, children, visitors, and also the stakeholders, governors, and parents. So we need to pay particular attention as leaders to how adults behave and ensure they support and enact agreed systems and strategies. So the collective responsibility and accountability can also be designed. There's been a lot of talk about instructional coaching, life coaching, but also just feedback, giving people feedback and them expecting feedback. And this is something that needs to be designed into the system. Because if you've agreed, for example, that in your school you're going to use particular language, you're going to use a word like consequence, there is or correction, which is used in some schools. So you have a correction because you were talking when I asked you to be quiet. That language is vitally important. So if somebody walks into a classroom and somebody's going shh, 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 rather like a steam train, which you hear a lot in some classrooms, that is not using the agreed script for that particular school. So the feedback should be given there and then to that member of staff, quietly, supportively, that we probably need to issue a correction there, miss, sir, whatever, so that actually supports the school as a whole. Now, this becomes very difficult in a school, in a large school, because you will have some staff who just make silly mistakes all the time. They just forget, and they've got habits which are hard to change, and getting them to use an agreed set of language points or agreed system or agreed structure for lining up children before they go into classroom, or setting up their desks before they come in, whatever it is sometimes difficult for them to do. So we need to keep reminding them. And that explicit expectation of continuous collective feedback is an important tool in developing collective efficacy. So when we're training staff, it's not enough to do the training and say, well, we've got the handbook, this is what it means, this is what we want you to do. These are experiences you might, these are things you might experience. this is what you're expected to do in that experience. Off you go. There needs also to be, at that point, an explanation to the staff that if it isn't done, it's up to all of us to remind each other, low stakes, continuous feedback, that we will be expecting these things to be done. And we will tell you if it's not being done. And I will invite, as a school leader, and I always did invite people to tell me if I'd forgotten it, if I wasn't doing it. And that's also vitally important. So that is a collective whole school culture of pointing out where things are not done. And any school improvement strategy only really works if you can get to that point where everybody is supporting everybody else to be consistent, because it's not easy. It's not easy. So continuous collective feedback, radical candor, as it's sometimes called by Kim Scott. I know candor is spelled with a U, but that's how Kim Scott book is entitled, because she's American. That's why. Sorry. The principles of collective feedback and feedback in general is that the approach supports the principle of collective efficacy. Being told what the standard is and being told when you don't meet the standard in a low stakes way to help you correct what you're doing is what makes us really effective. And us shying away from that, and other staff shying away from that, makes us less effective. So leaders need to make sure at this outset that collective support for a policy places responsibility for everybody to deliver all the time, and for every individual to point it out. Every individual should be able to remind others every time the standard isn't met. And there is a phrase, isn't there, that the behavior you walk past is the behavior you accept. And I think that's true of staff as well as students and pupils. So we need to be able to have the words to talk to other staff, to support them without undermining them, to uphold the consistency we expected in the school. Again, not easy. So once we've got all of this in place, we need to be checking whether it's working or not. We need to ensure there's capacity to follow any monitoring and review process, and we need to use data to drive marginal gains. So we need to be looking at detention rates, suspension rates, how many rewards are given, how many class dojos are given, how many times children are parked or missing break times or missing goal time. That needs to be examined. But when we're examining it, we also need to be aware that if expectations are rising, if there is a higher standard, it may well be that the data is going in the wrong direction. We also need to be talking to staff regularly whenever the standards are met. And as I said, that needs to start off as low stakes, but at some point it has to become more formal. Because usually in situations where we've got very simple procedures to follow, like potentially ensuring that the children have the right equipment, for example, and doing an equipment check, which is a requirement, say, of all staff or all, which may be in the staff code. If that's a requirement and isn't being done, it doesn't really need people to have an extraordinary level of capability to do that. It just simply, it has to be done, and it takes time. So if you continue prompting somebody about this and they're not doing it, there has to be a decision made at some time where that goes formal, but not formal in a capability sense, because everybody can do that, but formal in a disciplinary sense. And often we shy away from the disciplinary angle, which is actually much easier to prove, because you asked to do it, you haven't done it. You've asked to do it, you haven't done it, maybe 5 or 6 times. Then capability angle, where we're saying that person just can't do their job very well. We often gravitate towards, as leaders, taking it up as a capability issue when actually it is a disciplinary issue. And I think that's something we need to shift a little bit in our profession generally. And it's not something we go to easily. It's not something we go to as a knee-jerk reaction. But fundamentally, if we got people who are just refusing to follow because they don't believe in the system, irrespective of their role within the school, then it's not up to them to make that decision. Once the policy is set, it is school policy and it needs to be adopted, and we need to take action, and we need to be seen to be taking action, because if we're not, that will be the standard that others will gravitate towards. So pause and reflect. This is the hard bit of the leadership and management question. How effective is your current practice and day-to-day feedback to staff? How well are you feeding back to staff? How well are staff responding to feedback? What needs to change to improve efficacy? Is that things need to be clarified? There needs to be a fresh start. You need to reset your expectations. You need to heighten your expectations. Do you need to be taking more firm action with people who are just very resistant to doing what is agreed to school policy? And what blocks might you face in this, and how will these be overcome? You need to strategize those. When you think ahead to the consequences of taking these things on and what might come down the line, so that you're better equipped to deal with them if they do. So again, at least 10 minutes to think about that, and think about what I've been saying about collective feedback, and how that feedback needs to be time limited to improve the efficacy of the policy as you move forward. So, leadership and management of continuity and consistency. You can achieve a sustained culture shift by establishing a collective belief and vision of behavioral improvement. That's the first thing you need to do, as we said at the top of the presentation. Really, it's about trying to say, okay, we'll pin this to the vision. We know what we want to achieve. This is going to be a cornerstone of what we do. It's going to deliver other benefits to the school. This is why we're progressing this in this way. It needs careful planning and design, and not just planning and design in terms of the processes, but in terms of the sustainability, and in terms of preempting or anticipating potential problems and circumnavigating them, and think about lead times, and thinking about monitoring processes and capacity. Then you have to do the monitoring. That's through data observation and continuous collective feedback. As I've said, everybody giving feedback on the key things if they're not being done. The radical candor bit, just making sure that we understand we have all agreed to this and it must happen, and that if it doesn't happen, how that's moved forward to more formal processes. There's always a point where you have to review and adjust to realize marginal gains. It's not quite working in this area. How can we improve that? It's working better in early years than it is in key stage 2. Why is that? Finding out what the reasons are and addressing that. But it's very important that there is no ditching of the strategy, because any strategy you put in place will not be perfect. And what we have to do over time is refine, improve, refine and improve. And you're going to need to add to that mix time. So it's all of those ingredients put together, put in your school oven for at least 18 months to see where you're at the end of that process, and expect in that process to have difficulty. So pause and reflect, theory into action. Given your circumstances, given what you know about your school, and given the fact that I expect if you're watching this video, you're a leader or a significant manager within the school, what are the important next steps you need to take with regard to the leadership and management of behaviour? So what are you going to do as the first 3 points of your action plan, if you like, moving forward to make the difference to behaviour in your school? As we come to the end of this video, we just want to concentrate on revising or reviewing the key aspects of improving behaviour. As we said at the top, strong, effective, belief-driven leadership is really important. Careful and detailed planning, simple and effective system design, explicit consideration of implementation strategies, an insistence on continuous collective feedback and radical candor, spelled the right way this time. So apologies to any Americans watching the video. Review and adjustment of aggregating marginal gains, making those improvements year on year. And then you will start to see, by adherence to these processes, you will start to see improvement. Now, alongside this leadership approach, which is required in this particular area, but actually in most areas in school leadership, particularly with it in relation to behavior, there are some other videos which are worth watching. And one, creating systems and cultural norms, which is another video that I've put together, I'm leading on. It has a lot of information in there, practical information, practical systems that actually build and repeat some of the approaches that I've talked about here, but put them into real school context with the real school policies and how schools actually have gone about doing this really effectively. There's an attendance and punctuality module, which is really important, particularly at the moment post-pandemic, when we've got serious concerns about certain cohorts of children not attending school regularly. There's a module on data and monitoring, the most effective and reasonable ways in which you can do that, and how that can lead to more improved outcomes. And obviously the vexed question of how we provide support for and structures for SEND pupils to enable them to meet the behavioural expectations, or when do we make those exceptional adjustments? So that's the end of the slideshow. I hope that's been useful, and at least it gives you some impetus to strengthen your approach in leadership of behavior, and be resilient, because it's a tough gig, and behavior is one of the things which is increasingly difficult in terms of the presentation of young people post-pandemic, but it's something we really can do better at if we adopt the principles which Tom outlines in creating a culture, and we've seen to be really effectively implemented across lots of schools through the Behaviour Hubs programme, but actually schools that have independently done this themselves without reliance on any frameworks or approaches, because they have a belief that this is really important and have put that at the head of their priorities, which has led to lots of further aspects of school improvement following. Thank you very much for listening.